Welcome to episode 16 of Disky Discussions. I'm your host, AB Basson. In this week's episode, I'm joined by Joe Crann. Joe made a name for himself in South Africa as one of the top football journalists in the country during almost 9 years at Soccer Laduma. A die-hard Sheffield Wednesday supporter, Joe now works for Sheffield Star, where he covers his beloved Owls in their fight for championship survival. Joe, thanks for joining me on Disky Discussions. Even in your dad's van, you're looking good, and it looks like a cold weather over in Sheffield. How's things?
Yeah, it's not warm, mate. I won't lie. So I know where I'd rather be at the minute. Put it that way. So my little brother's got a boat, and it's my day off today, so I thought I'd help him out with it and get some stuff done on there. But it's a little bit colder than where my fiance is at the minute right now in Joburg.
Yeah, it's very warm. Yeah, so not just a journalist, but also a hardworking man working on a boat.
Yeah, you see, I worked for. This is definitely not why you're talking to me, but I worked for years with my dad. My dad's a decorator, so I learnt a trade growing up. So aside from my journalism stuff, I spent a few years as a painter and decorator as well. So yeah, he likes to call on me every now and again when he needs a hand.
So this is essentially a South African podcast, but since we're talking to you, we should and we must talk about Sheffield Wednesday, even if it is just for a few minutes.
Keep it brief, mate.
Yeah, your team is not doing so good at the moment. Obviously, the points deduction didn't help at the start of the season. What is it like supporting Sheffield Wednesday, and why? Say now there's a soccer fan out there who doesn't have a team to support. Why should they support Sheffield Wednesday?
I wish I could give them reasons, mate. Right now, there's nothing to really write home about. But no, look, for me, I worked in South Africa for the best part of 10 years, and it felt like for me, the next step was always to get back to the UK at some point. You want to work in the biggest league in the world. And, for me, it was always a sort of stepping stone towards the Premier League and that kind of thing. But writing about Sheffield Wednesday is a dream. It's anyone who supports a football club knows what it's like to have that sort of ingrained into you, no matter how bad things might get. It's just there. And, there was a moment, Wednesday played Bournemouth a couple of weeks back, and the Sky cameras were right behind me where I was sat. And obviously there's no fans in there, so there's no noise. And Wednesday scored a last minute winner. It was like the 91st minute. And on the video, on Sky's video, you could actually hear me celebrating, which I'm not sure is it's not probably particularly professional, but when you support a club, the way I see it, as long as I can be objective, as long as I can criticise when they need to be criticised, and I'm not too hard on them if they deserve some kind of praise because I'm feeling emotional or whatever. As long as I can take my emotion out of my work, I don't think it's a particular problem having a football club as a journalist. I know it's a big thing in South Africa. In South Africa, people always talk about he's a Chiefs fan or he's a Pirates fan or whatever. But for me, as long as you can be objective in the work that you do, none of us grew up thinking I might be a journalist one day, I'd better not pick a team. That's not how it works. We all get into the game because we have an affiliation to somebody or something like that. I find it with myself, being able to write about my football club is an honour. Generally, I feel like I'm privileged, especially now. Now nobody is going to football games. I'm part of a very exclusive club of people who are allowed to watch Sheffield Wednesday live, and that doesn't that sort of fact is not lost on me, put it that way.
It is quite a big thing. It's interesting you bring it up. It is quite a big thing in South Africa where journalists aren't allowed to have a fan, the club they support. You're not allowed to be a fan. Yeah. Over the years, you probably were a supporter of 20 different clubs in South Africa. Chiefs half of the time, Pirates, Sundowns. How did you deal with it over the 10 years? And do you think, as journalists, we are in the end of the day also allowed to be fans of the sport?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, no matter who you are, you grew up supporting a team. Whether that's a local team in South Africa, whether it's a team in the UK, wherever you are, everyone supports a team. That's why you get into football, because you have a love for it, so much so that you want to do it as a job. For me, I was lucky in the sense that I could genuinely say I do not support that team, and it's not that people always thought that it was just me making an excuse, but I genuinely, not to sound flippant, but I couldn't care less. For me, the way I always saw it in South Africa is I have colleagues, I have friends. I mean, obviously we were speaking when you were working for Ajax. So, you know, with someone like yourself, it was nice to see Ajax do well when you were there because you're a friend. And, you know, that's, like I say, the way I always saw it was that there was pretty much somebody at every single club in South Africa where if they won a game, there was somebody I could be happy for. So, you know, I never really had any affiliation because I didn't grow up in South Africa. So there was no reason for me to have a team. But yeah, it's weird that people want to sort of, it's almost like they want to label you because it makes them feel better. You know, if you say something negative about their club, especially if it's right and it hits a little bit close to home, if they can say, oh, well, you support the opposition, then I suppose it makes them feel a little bit better.
So how did you end up in South Africa? For those who are listening to the podcast and, you know, don't know your backstory, you obviously came here, I think it was during the World Cup 2010, and ended up staying for close to a decade or more than a decade. How did you end up in South Africa, and how did you end up at Soccer Laduma?
So the long story is I came to South Africa in 2006 just on a family holiday. My dad read a lot of Wilbur Smith growing up. So for his 50th birthday, my mum bought like a family holiday. We all came out to South Africa. We did a bit of a tour. We started off in Cape Town, went up to Joburg, did a bit of KZN, all that kind of stuff. And I just fell in love with the place. You know, I just had an affiliation to South Africa straight away. And I can't explain to you what it was. I don't know what it was about South Africa. I went in 2006 and I remember it was probably within the first week of me being there. And I said to my mum, I was 16. I said to my mum, I'm going back for the World Cup. And she's like, yeah, of course you are. You're 16. You think you're going to get your ass together there for the World Cup. But I did. I saved up. You know, I did like a 12-month trip around the world that I'd sort of did as a gap year. And I started off in South Africa for the World Cup. So came in 2010 and I was meant to be working for the Daily Voice, actually. I had a sort of internship through a company called Projects Abroad where I was going to be staying with a host family just outside Grassy Park, actually, in Cape Town. So I was staying with a host family there and I was meant to be working for the Daily Voice. But then probably 3 weeks after I was due to arrive, so 3 weeks before I was due to arrive, I got a phone call and someone said, would you mind being a guinea pig for us? We've got this potential opportunity at a company called Soccer Laduma. You're the first one who'd be doing it. Would you mind? I was like, so you're asking me if I want to go work for a football publication during the World Cup? Yeah, I reckon I can do that.
Sounds good.
So I did that and I did a month. And then after I'd done my month internship, they asked me to stick around for a little bit. So I did a few bits after that for 2 weeks until the World Cup finished. And then when I'd done that, the guy in charge, Peter Dutoy, who you know obviously as well, Peter said, look, we'd love to have you on. You know, if we like the work that you do, we like the sort of energy you bring to it. Would you consider coming to work for us? And you know, I had this whole trip planned. This was right at the start of my gap year. So I had like 11 months worth of traveling still to do. And I was like, look, I've saved up forever to do this. I can't just sort of pull the plug. And I was meant to be going to university in the UK. I'd been accepted into a couple of universities I was going to sort of weigh up and possibly go to. And so I went off on my merry way and I thought, you know, they'd probably just say that to all the guys who come along. And that was kind of the end of it. And then I was in Australia about 6 months down the line and I got an email from Peter who said, look, we weren't joking. Like, we'd love to have you back. So I figured, a year in South Africa, that won't hurt. So I sort of deferred from university and I thought I'll go to South Africa for a year. A year turned to 10, basically. Obviously worked at Laduma in Cape Town I think I was there for about 18 months in Cape Town. And then I think you all know as much as anybody, mate, you hit a bit of a glass ceiling in South Africa when you're down in the Western Cape. After 18 months or so, I just sort of came to the realization that if I wanted to sort of get to the peak of my powers in South Africa, that I had to be in Joburg. My fiance got a job with 5FM and it just kind of, the stars aligned a little bit. So I shifted up to Joburg and I was, I think, there for about 7.5 years before obviously moved back to the UK now. But it's been a hell of a journey, and what was meant to be a month-long internship turned into a 10-year love affair.
Why do you think you became so good at your job? In South Africa, I think everyone referred to you when they were looking at transfers in the South African market. I think, maybe 20 years ago, it wasn't such a big deal, the whole transfer deadline thing, but it's gradually picked up in South Africa. And, we know how big a deal it is in South Africa, everyone watching Sky Sports on deadline day. Why do you think you became so good and at your job in South Africa?
I mean, you're being very kind there. I consider myself to be okay at my job. But yeah, no, I think for me, one of the things I tried to do when I moved to South Africa was I tried to find a niche. I tried to find something that nobody else was doing. And the transfer thing was sort of one thing that I sort of pinpointed and thought, nobody is really hitting this hard. No one is doing the whole, like I said, the Sky Sports news thing, sort of reporting each and every aspect of a transfer. When a transfer happens, it's more than just somebody signs. Nowadays you'll see people talking about, terms have been agreed, an offer's been accepted, he's having his medical, all these kind of different things. And the way I saw it was always about sort of trying to tell the story and trying to sort of give a narrative from start to finish as much as you possibly can. The other thing that and this is probably, it sounds really obvious and probably quite daft, but reliability. The way that I worked, I would only ever put my name to stuff that I could verify myself. And that's no disrespect to sort of colleagues and other people in the industry, but I can't stand by something if I don't know it myself. Do you know what I mean? Like, so when I was sort of using my social media the way that I did, and I think that when I arrived, not many people were using it the same way that I was. I think that was sort of one way I got ahead of the game a little bit. I was using social media in a different way to what a lot of the guys who came before me were. And like I say, it was all about being reliable, because people don't forget. You get a few stories wrong and all of a sudden people are like, but you said this happened, you said this happened. There's obviously the famous Rainford Calabar one was a long time ago now, but with Calabar, like,
you still had
there was a lot. Yeah, there was a lot said from different people, and obviously that transfer fell through in the end. And I think what some people forget with a transfer is it's never done until it's done. And just because something didn't happen in the end doesn't mean it was never going to happen. Doesn't mean it was never on the cards. And that's what I was talking about earlier, about sort of telling the story and sort of having that free flowing narrative that goes all the way through it. But like I say, for me, the thing that I sort of tried to find was something that made me different, because there were a lot of guys in our industry who were trying to do the job to the best of their ability. But if you're making the same noise as everybody else, you just kind of drown into it. Whereas if you're making a different noise, all of a sudden hear that and they go, hang on a second, that's a bit different. Let me go check that out. So one of the things that I did as well as the transfer stuff was the players abroad. And that sort of became my thing. It started off where I was just reporting results, and then it got to a stage where, like, I remember like scrolling through the internet for hours and hours trying to find a South African, like a goal that a South African had scored in the Belgian third division, just because it was something that I sort of knew I had, and I was making GIFs out of it and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. So that kind of became my thing. And now you see people like Prince, who's doing a really good job with that now. Obviously Farpo, Soccer Laduma, Kickoff, everybody's covering the sort of players abroad. But I think when I was doing it, it was, I suppose I was a bit earlier to the party, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And the way that I was covering it, I wasn't just sort of saying so and so scored. I was, like I say, spending ages trying to find. It got to a point when, like with China, Dino and Lovu would send me video. Like Dino would be like, "I've scored this goal, by the way. If you want to post it, you can post it." And I was like, "Excellent, that'll do." Because searching the internet for Chinese football videos is very difficult, because they have their whole different internet there. Like, you don't find it on Google so much. But yeah, I really enjoy that aspect because it gives you I suppose a broadness of knowledge. You watch a lot more football in different places, so you get to understand a bit more about the standard of leagues. Do you know what I mean? Like, it was one of the things I always said. People would criticize it. For instance, Dino and Lovu, like with Dino, people would always have a crack at the Chinese league, and it's like, have you watched it though? And it is not to say whether it's good or bad, but if you haven't watched it, you can't say. And I think for me, the point with that was that that's exactly how people think of the PSL. You know, you ask outside South Africa what people think of the PSL, and they will have either no knowledge of it, or they'll go, well, it's African football, you know, it can't be that good. But unless you've watched it, you can't have an opinion on it.
True. We can't talk about players abroad and not touch on Percy Tau, obviously now playing in the Premier League. How big of a move was that for South Africa and for him? And, you know, how excited were you to have another South African, because you are South African in part, in England?
Yeah, look, I think the thing with Percy's move was, it was, as much as it's a great move for him personally, I think it was kind of symbolic. You know, it was the fact that, look, without Brexit, I think Percy probably still wouldn't be playing in the UK. Brexit opened a door that was probably not going to be available to him. So, you know, that's amazing. That's lovely to see. And I'm really, really pleased for him, because I know how hard Percy works, and I know the kind of attitude that he's got. And the thing that I think sets Percy out from a lot of the other sort of South African footballers, and probably footballers in general, is that he has that desire to be better, that desire to be the best possible player that he can be. And, you know, until he has reached a level where he thinks, you know, I can't do any better than this, he will always strive to try and improve himself. And I think that is, you know, that's testament to him and his upbringing. It's testament to his personality. And, you know, I think it's amazing. But like I say, on top of that, the symbol of the situation, because of how long it's been since we had a South African in the Premier League. I mean, South Africans in England are rare. So to be playing in the Premier League is huge. And it just, I suppose it reignites a bit of a flame, you know, for I think a lot of players, that people always talk about playing in Europe and playing in the Premier League, but for a long time, it just felt like a pipe dream, because the work permit situation made it so difficult to achieve that I think people, probably to some extent, stopped thinking it could happen, because there was so much that had to fall into place for you to achieve that level of getting to the Premier League. And a lot of it didn't even rest on your actual ability. You know, it was other sort of outside things going on that you needed to rely on. Whereas now, Percy walking out in a Premier League game for the first time, I think for an entire generation of South African footballers, they will go, right, that's the level now. You know, that's where we can get to. And I think, like I say, as much as it's amazing for Percy, and I'm absolutely chuffed for him, I'm really gutted that I can't go, because under normal circumstances, you know, his first game, I would have made a plan to get there. But obviously with the COVID situation, it's not possible. But hopefully I will get a chance to go and see him. And like I say, it's amazing for him, but I think it's also a hell of a lot bigger than Percy as well.
Yeah, most definitely. I think it was the first time in 4 years after Stephen Pienaar played for Sunderland that we had a South African in the Premier League. What do you think? What do you think South Africa needs to do to have more players playing at that level? Because it's not just the Premier League; it's across to, you know, La Liga, Serie A. We don't have any prominent players in any of the top divisions apart from Percy at this point in time. What do we need to do as a country to produce more high level talent?
Yeah, I mean, there's $1 million question, isn't it? If I knew the answer to that, I'd be heading up SAFA. You know, it's really tough, because there's so many sort of aspects of it. You know, and I think to some extent, I think South Africa's, not really sure how to word it. South Africa's commercial sort of success, and the PSL's commercial success, I think in some ways has hurt the country. Because I think if you look at some of the more successful nations in Africa, you know, you look at your Ghanas and your Cameroons and your Egypts, and Egypt's a bad example, but you know, some of the other more prominent African nations, there is a need to go out and get as high as you can, because it's the only way that you can make a living, you know, and further your family, further yourself. You know, if you are, you know, no disrespect, but if you're growing up in Cameroon, you need to get out, because you will never earn the kind of money you want to earn by playing in the Cameroon National League. That it won't happen. Whereas for South Africa, you can play for Kaizer Chiefs and you can earn as much as what you could earn for, playing for a championship team in England. There were players in South Africa earning 6, 7, 8 million rand a year. Why would you leave? If you don't have that same attitude that Percy's got, Percy could have happily sat in South Africa and could have become the highest paid player in the country, and he's still young enough. He could be a multi-billionaire. Sorry, billionaire strong, multi-million by the time he's finished, and he would have had it easy because he could have just maintained that same level and he would have been all right. But that's what I'm saying. What makes him different is that that wasn't enough for him, and I think for some players, it is enough. So they don't have that same drive to get out and sort of better themselves. And by following on from bettering yourself, you're bettering the nation. I think that is changing. I think you look at the younger generation of Bafana players now, and it's there. You can see that it's there. You've got your sort of generation of youngsters who have got out a little bit earlier, who've got that drive to sort of, like I said, be as good as they can be. But it's far bigger than just that. I would like to. I wish I could say that was the only reason, but it's not. There's a lot going on, and I think you speak to. I would go as far as saying you could speak to every single journalist in South African football, and they would all have at least one reason why they think it's not going where it should be. And a lot of those reasons would be different to the other journalists, to be honest.
You still keep a close eye on South African League, the DStv Premiership,
yeah, of course, as
we call it now. We can't, not talk about Kaizer Chiefs and their decline. Obviously, coming so close to winning the league last season, losing it on the final day the way they did, and then also having a transfer ban. All of that adds up. But it was way before that their problems have started. It's been multiple years now without a trophy. Which is, a crisis for a club, as big as Kaizer Chiefs. What do you think has gone wrong? Their problems started while you were still in South Africa and has just been growing.
Yeah, it feels like with Chiefs that they sort of, looks like they fell behind the curve. Do you know what I mean? Like, it feels like they, I think the best way to put it is that I think for a long time, Kaizer Chiefs relied on being Kaizer Chiefs, and that was enough. When it came to signings, when it came to the way that people approached them when they went up against them, that being Kaizer Chiefs was enough to get them through a lot of the time, because people were sort of fearful of playing them. They'd get players because they knew that it's Kaizer Chiefs, it's a big brand, and you could tell, like I say, long before I left, that was changing a little bit. There was a time when, if Kaizer Chiefs offered the same amount as any other team in the league, people would go to Chiefs because it's Kaizer Chiefs, and it's one of the biggest teams in the country, one of the biggest teams in the continent. But by the time I left, if you were looking at Kaizer Chiefs as a football club, if there was a player who was wanted by Chiefs and Sundowns and Wits and Cape Town City, if rand for rand, if they were offering the same money, I don't think the decision was as cut and dried as it used to be. We saw it. We saw it. How many times did the Chiefs get linked with a player and he ended up at Wits? Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Like, it was not. They don't have that same draw that they used to have anymore. And obviously the points. I'm talking about points. That's too much time on Sheffield Wednesday. The transfer ban has hurt them. There's no doubt. And Gavin's got a tough ask on his hands. And I think the fact that Ernst managed to get them to second was pretty impressive, really, because that decline has been apparent for a long time. Since Stuart Baxter left, it's not really fell into place for him. The signings they've made, have not really been up to Kaizer Chiefs quality. I mean, how many times have we seen Chiefs sign players and then they get released a year later, 2 years later, having not played any games? I mean, you can reel off a list of players that have signed for Chiefs and left without making any sort of impact at the club. And that's something that needs to change for them. But I think the one main thing for them is they've lost all sense of fear factor. You know, they don't have it anymore. You look at the Amazulu game, and obviously at 1-1, Chiefs have just got back into it. You know, they get you get to a situation where they are 1-1, and you think they sort of take the ascendancy then, because the other team gets scared and they're like, this is Kaizer Chiefs, we had our chance and now we've blown it, and then that all kind of builds up.
Yeah.
But now what happens is they go and lose that game 2-1 because Amazulu go, it's Chiefs, innit? You know?
Yeah.
And they don't have that same, like I say, that same fear and mental aspects of what Kaizer Chiefs are or were, is just, like I say, it's gone. It's not there anymore.
It's almost like they passed that fear factor on to Mamelodi Sundowns, who are still unbeaten. And, you know, the Pitsa Mosimane dynasty started 2 or 3 years into your reign at Soccer Laduma.
My reign? I mean, your reign. Like I was the most important there.
Yeah, too much time writing about football. Talking like you're the head coach. Yeah, it's, you know, get back to Sundowns, still unbeaten this season. You know, won 5 league titles under Pitsa Mosimane. Obviously the Champions League, CAF Super Cup, the list goes on. You know, what have they done right? You know, there was a point in time a few years back where they just signed for signing's sake. I remember them signing 3 or 4 players from one club, you know, Black Leopards signing Monama and Ramagalela, and then just releasing them a few months later. But it seems like they've ironed out everything. And, you know, the new coaches have picked up where Mosimane left off.
Yeah, Pitso did an incredible job at Sundowns. Pitso turned them into the best team in the country. I don't think that you know, I know that there are club allegiances and there's things like that, but I don't think anyone can really argue over the last 10 years. Sundowns are the most successful team in South Africa, and what they achieved under Pitso is incredible. So much so that Pitso not only was a success while he's there, and don't get me wrong, I'm taking nothing away from Rulani and Ngoba and all the guys who are there. Pitso set that up. You know, Pitso has set the sort of the wheel in motion there, and he's set them up for years to come with the sort of things that he's put in place and the way that he worked and the standards that he set to be a professional footballer at Mamelodi Sundowns. And you know, I think it would be remiss of me not to mention the money. Do you know what I mean? I think it's like talking about Man City and not mentioning the fact that they can afford to go, you know, blow 40, 50 million pounds regularly.
Yeah.
You know, Sundowns are able to attract the best players, but they're able to attract the best players for 2 reasons. Firstly, because they're incredibly wealthy and they can, you know, blow everybody else out of the water financially, but also because they're an incredibly good football team who play great football. So they're a double-barreled attack now at Sundowns, and you know, it feels like they've over the last few years become a little bit smarter with the signings they made. Like you touched on, they're a little bit more, quality over quantity than they used to be. And I think it's interesting with some of the players where, because of the reputation they did have, certain players went there and you thought, well, that's it. You know, they had this sort of reputation as being career killers for certain players where you knew they were going to go there and it wasn't going to work out. And there are still some of those. You know, there's always going to be a few hit and misses. Every club has them.
Yeah.
But you look at someone like a Lyle Kay, for instance. You know, you look at Lyle and the way that he has established himself at Sundowns. You know, I've always been a big fan of Lyle. I think he's a great player, but I don't think everybody had the full confidence in Lyle that he was going to go on and become one of the best left backs in the country. You know what I mean? Like they've been really, really smart in the sort of players they've brought in, and I think that's a massive credit for Pitso, because you know, he didn't get to where he is and achieve what he's achieved by fluke. He's incredibly good at what he does, and I think Sundowns are going to be a force for years to come. And I think that they are a team with the resources that they have. They're a team that should be probably doing to the PSL what a Bayern regularly do in the Bundesliga.
Before I let you get back to work, if you could maybe just, mention a few players that stood out during your 10 years in South Africa. There's been a lot of players that have caught the eye. If you think of guys like Kamar Billiat, Kermit Erasmus is still playing at a very high level. Which players stand out over the 10 years you were here? We all have our favorites. Is there anyone in particular, or do you have a few?
Yeah, I mean, look, for different reasons. I think for me, one that really stands out is Hlompo. The reason Hlompo stands out is because I think over the entire time I was in South Africa, he was the only player that was consistently good. KK was consistently solid throughout my entire time in South Africa. And I don't think you can really say that about anybody else.
No.
There's been players who have been better than him. Do you know what I mean? But they've not done it regularly as he has. You look at sort of Karma Billiat and his peak. When Karma was flying at Sundowns, he could be unplayable sometimes. Karma, ability-wise, is ridiculous. He's a great footballer. But Hlompo's done it for over a decade now. He's been consistently good for that length of time. And I think that's amazing to have that level of consistency. And anyone who talks to KK knows why. You speak to him and you realise the sort of level of professionalism that he's got and the way that he works and the way he goes about his business. And it's absolutely no surprise to see him sort of achieve what he's achieved. Shabba always sticks out for me. I think Shabba, just because the World Cup started it. I remember when I'd first come over to South Africa and watching his goal go in. I was in a bar in Cape Town with, I'd only been there about 3 days when I'd just moved over to start my internship, and it's sort of he's iconic. Shabba is iconic. He's an iconic person. He's an iconic footballer, and he also a great pro. Scored some ridiculous goals. Weirdly, last week, I don't know why it popped into my head, but his goal against Free State Stars that he scored.
I watched it on your Twitter.
Into my head. Just the technique of it, he's that left foot is. And I think, he always stuck out for me. Kermit's one. Kermit just, I'm not sure in terms of raw natural ability, I don't think South Africa has produced a player in my time as good as Kermit. In terms of his natural born ability as a footballer and his football brain. I don't know if there's anybody better. Percy stuck out. Keegan Dolly stuck out. Keegan was great to watch. When Keegan was flying at Sundowns, he was brilliant.
CBD.
But there's been a lot. The CBD was that was a lot of fun. I think Willard Katsandy is also one as well. I know that he's become a bone of contention now. People like to talk about Willard, but there was a period, when Stuart Baxter came in, and for a couple of years afterwards, probably, where Willard was the best defensive midfielder in the country. And there's always a story that I was told about Willard. I'll keep it short, but basically, what happened with Willard was he went into when Stuart Baxter arrived. Willard was known as he was just a breaker. He would just hurt people, and Stuart Baxter sort of had a chat with him. Apparently he's the only one who used to go up to training in shin pads, because he was like he was that committed to the cause that he was like, I'm not gonna get hurt in training. So he always used to wear shinnies for training. But they weren't sure. Stuart Baxter wasn't sure what he was going to get out of Willard, because he wasn't sure if there was a footballer in there. He knew he had sort of the physical attributes, but he wasn't sure if there was a footballer there. And he had a chat with Willard, and Willard was like, I want to be the best footballer that I can be, and took on board everything that everyone was saying, whether it was Stuart, whether it was the other coaches, he took everything on board. And I think that's one thing that will always stick out for me about Willard Katsandy, is that he was just a sponge. And if you give him instructions and you sort of use him properly, obviously as age catches up with you, it does make a difference. But Willard was when Chiefs were sort of dominating, they didn't dominate without Willard Katsandy. It's that simple.
On that point, we should probably talk just briefly about Itumeleng Khune, going through a bit of a bad patch at this point in time. But, I think it's easy to forget how good he was at his peak, and his distribution is revered around the world, as being one of the best. How good is it, Tumulen Kune, and, how good was he at his peak?
Yeah, Itu at his peak was ridiculous. I was just, there's always a bit of sadness with me with Itu. I always wonder how good he could have been if he'd gone. Do you know what I mean? If he'd gone somewhere else and sort of been able to take it to that next level. Because, when he was at his peak, I mean this, I don't know if there is a keeper in the world that had the kind of distribution that he has. Like, you look at some of the best keepers that you talk about now, your Edisons and people like that who have got that kind of, ability to create. And when Itu was really flying, like I say, I don't know if there was a better keeper in the world. That those sort of sidewinder kicks that he sort of became known for, the way that he would start attacks regularly with those was amazing to see. Like, I know it's kind of route one a little bit, but when it's done with that kind of class and that technique, even if you don't like route one football, all you can do is sit back and admire. When he's picking long range passes to Shabba out wide, and it's really, really, it was good to see. And it's like I say, for me, I think with Itu, there's always going to be that sort of tinge of sadness, because I just wonder how far he could have gone if things had panned out a little bit differently for him.
Most definitely. Well, Joe, thanks for joining me from the comfort of your dad's van. It's been great catching up, and and good luck in Sheffield, and good luck with Sheffield Wednesday. I'm sure they'll be on the up very soon, and we hope to see them in the Premier League, if not over the next.
Fingers crossed.
Well, definitely not this season, but maybe over the next 2 years. Fingers crossed.
Definitely. Thanks very much for your time, and it's nice to know that I've not been forgotten.
Definitely not. Cheers, Joe.
Cheers.
Thank you for listening to Disky Discussions. If you have any questions or guests you'd like me to have on the show, please hit me up at AB_Basson on Twitter or on Instagram. Stay safe, like, subscribe, aware.